SpaceX engineers completed the final weld on Super Heavy Booster 19. What happened next, captured on security cameras but not yet publicly acknowledged, reveals something extraordinary about humanity's timeline to Mars. The facility went silent. No cheers, no celebration, just 200 people staring at a rocket that wasn't supposed to exist for another 6 months. Welcome back. On November 22nd, Booster 18 exploded during ground testing at Starbase, Texas. The liquid oxygen tank ruptured in what SpaceX internally called a catastrophic COPV failure. That booster was meant to carry Starship version 3, the Mars-capable variant, on its maiden flight in early 2026. The explosion should have delayed everything by 9 months, maybe a year. Instead, 26 days later, Booster 19 stood fully stacked. That's half the time it took to build any previous Super Heavy booster. Something has changed at SpaceX, and what it means for 2026 goes far beyond rocket assembly speeds. Elon Musk confirmed it on January 11th. SpaceX will attempt to send uncrewed Starships to Mars during the next launch window, which opens in late 2026. Not a flyby, not an orbit, an actual landing attempt on the Martian surface. This would mark the first time a private entity has sent spacecraft to another planet. And if you're thinking that sounds impossibly ambitious, you're not alone. Former NASA Administrator Sean Duffy expressed concern in October about SpaceX's progress. But here's what changed. The new NASA Administrator, sworn in December, is Jared Isaacman, a commercial astronaut and close associate of Musk. Suddenly, NASA's concerns about SpaceX evaporated. The timeline accelerated immediately after that transition. Now, SpaceX isn't just talking about Mars anymore, they're building hardware. Starship version 3 represents a fundamental redesign. It's taller than previous versions. It features the new Raptor 3 engine, which SpaceX claims offers significantly better performance than earlier Raptors. The heat shield has been completely reworked after 3 consecutive Starships exploded during re-entry in early 2025. Version 3 is specifically engineered for deep space missions, but sending a rocket to Mars isn't like sending one to orbit. The physics are brutal. You need 933 metric tons of liquid oxygen and 267 metric tons of liquid methane just to make the journey. Starship can't launch with that much fuel. The rocket would be too heavy to leave Earth's surface, so SpaceX developed orbital refueling. Here's how it works. One Starship launches and reaches orbit. Then multiple tanker Starships launch, one after another, each carrying propellant. They dock with the first Starship and transfer fuel. Once the tanks are full, the Mars-bound Starship ignites its engines and begins the 3 to 4 month journey. Simple in concept, monumentally complex in execution. SpaceX tested this once in 2024, transferring just 5 metric tons between 2 tanks on the same Starship. That's more 0.4% of what's needed for Mars. The full-scale demonstration between 2 separate Starships is planned for 2026, but it hasn't happened yet. And here's the sobering mathematics. If SpaceX sends 5 Starships to Mars in late 2026, they would need approximately 60 tanker launches just to fuel those 5 ships. 60 launches in roughly 6 months. That's a launch every 3 days, sustained for half a year, with 0 failures in the refueling process. SpaceX currently launches a Falcon 9 about every 2.5 days, but Starship is exponentially more complex. Version 2 had a 40% failure rate across 2025. 3 out of 5 test flights ended in destruction. Version 3 is untested. Flight 12, the debut of version 3, is tentatively scheduled for February or March 2026. 1 test flight. Then SpaceX would begin the orbital refueling demonstrations, scale up to 60 tanker missions, and launch multiple Mars-bound Starships, all within the same year. What do you think? Is this timeline realistic, or is SpaceX setting itself up for a very public failure? Write your estimate in the comments. But let's assume the launches succeed, that the refueling works, that 5 Starships actually depart from Mars in late 2026. What happens when they get there? Mars landing is where physics becomes genuinely terrifying. Starship masses over 100 metric tons fully loaded. Nothing that heavy has ever attempted a powered landing on Mars. The Martian atmosphere is 100 times thinner than Earth's. There's not enough air for parachutes to work, but there's enough friction to incinerate anything moving too fast. Starship has to decelerate from 7.5 kilometers per second to 0 using only its engines. In Earth's atmosphere, Starship uses its heat shield and atmospheric drag to slow down before firing engines. On Mars, the heat shield helps, but the engines do most of the work, and those engines need fuel. Fuel that was transported 200 million kilometers through space, subjected to radiation and temperature fluctuations for 4 months. Will it still burn correctly? SpaceX hasn't tested this. No one has. Musk has identified the landing site, Arcadia Planitia, a volcanic plain in Mars' northern hemisphere. It's relatively flat, reducing landing risks, and it may contain subsurface water ice, which future missions could extract and convert into rocket fuel. But here's what SpaceX hasn't disclosed. How do they plan to verify the landing site is actually safe? The answer, apparently, is no one scouts ahead. The first Starships are the scouts. They'll land, or they'll crash, and either way, we'll learn something. That's the SpaceX philosophy. Iterate through failure, test in production. It worked for Falcon 9 eventually. After 3 failures, the 4th launch succeeded. But Mars is different. You can't rapidly iterate when each test costs billions and takes 26 months between launch windows. If the 2026 missions fail, the next opportunity is 2028. If those fail 2030, suddenly Musk's vision of sending humans to Mars by 2029 starts looking less like ambition and more like fantasy. Or does it? Because here's what we keep underestimating. SpaceX has a pattern. They announce something that sounds impossible. The entire aerospace industry explains why it can't be done. And then SpaceX does it. They said reusable orbital rockets were economically unfeasible. Falcon 9 has now landed over 300 boosters. They said catching a descending rocket with mechanical arms was suicidal. In October 2024, Mechazilla caught Super Heavy on its first attempt. They said rapid rocket reusability would take decades. SpaceX is currently reusing Falcon 9 boosters within 48 hours. So when SpaceX says they're going to Mars in 2026, maybe the question isn't whether they'll try. Maybe the question is, what happens if they succeed? Thank you for watching, and here's my question for you. If SpaceX actually lands a Starship on Mars in 2026, does that change humanity's future more than the Apollo moon landings did? Or is Mars just the next predictable step? Share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time.